Hispania was the Roman name for the Iberian Peninsula. Under the Republic, Hispania was divided into two provinces, Hispania Citerior and Hispania Ulterior. During the Principate, Hispania Ulterior was divided into two new provinces, Boeotia and Lusitania, while Hispania Citerior was renamed Tarraconensis. Subsequently, the western part of Tarraconensis was split off, first as Hispania Nova, later renamed Calaretia. From Diocletian's Tetrarchy onwards, the south of remaining Tarraconensis was again split off as Carthaginiensis, and probably then too the Balearic Islands and all the resulting provinces formed one civil diocese under the Vocarius for the Hispania. The name Hispania was also used in the period of Visigothic rule. The modern name Espana derives from Hispania. Name. The origin of the word Hispania is much disputed, and the evidence for the various speculations are based merely upon what are at best mere resemblances, likely to be accidental, and suspect supporting evidence. One theory holds it to be of Punic derivation, from the Phoenician language of colonizing Carthage. Specifically, it may derive from a Punic cognate of Hebrew meaning island of the Hyrax, or island of the hare, or island of the rabbit. Others derive the word from Phoenician span, in the sense of hidden, and make it indicate a hidden, that is, a remote, or far distant land. Another theory, proposed by the etymologist Eric Partridge in his work Origins, is that it is of Iberian derivation and that it is to be found in the pre-Roman name for Seville, Hispalis, which strongly hints at an ancient name for the country of *Hispa, an Iberian or Celtic root whose meaning is now lost. Isidore of Sevilla considered Hispania derived from Hispalis. Hispalis may alternatively derive from Heliopolis. However, the true origin of the name is Phoenician Spal, lowland. According to Manuel Pellicer Catalan, a rendering this explanation of Hispania dubious. Occasionally Hispania was called Hesperia Ultima, the last western land, in Greek, by Roman writers, since the name Hesperia had already been used by the Greeks to indicate the Italian peninsula. Another theory holds that the name derives from Ezed Pana, the Basque word for border or edge, thus meaning the farthest area or place. During Antiquity and Middle Ages, the literary texts derived the term Hispania from an eponymous hero named Hispan, who is mentioned for the first time in the work of the Roman historian Gnaeus Pompeius Trogus, in the 1st century BC. Although Hispania is the Latin root for the modern name of Spain, substituting Spanish for Hispanicus or Hispanic, or Spain for Hispania, though sometimes done by historians in the more general context of a common peninsular history, is anachronistic and can be misleading, since the borders of modern Spain do not coincide with those of the Roman province of Hispania or of the Visigothic kingdom of the same name which succeeded it, and have always shifted, and so does not even include the territory of present-day Portugal. The Latin term Hispania was often used during Antiquity and the High Middle Ages as a geographical name for the Iberian Peninsula, but its modern cognates, Spain and Spanish, have become increasingly associated with the Kingdom of Spain alone. After the union of the Central Peninsular Kingdom of Castile with the Eastern Peninsular Kingdom of Aragon in the 15th century under the Catholic monarchs. Pre-Roman history. The Iberian Peninsula has long been inhabited, first by early hominids such as Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis and Homo antecessor. In the Paleolithic period, the Neanderthals entered Iberia and eventually took refuge from the advancing migrations of modern humans. In the 40th millennium BC, during the Upper Paleolithic and the Last Ice Age, the first large settlement of Europe by modern humans occurred. These were nomadic hunter-gatherers originating on the steppes of Central Asia. When the last ice age reached its maximum extent, during the 30th millennium BC, these modern humans took refuge in southern Europe, namely in Iberia, after retreating through southern France. In the millennia that followed, the Neanderthals became extinct and local modern human cultures thrived, producing prehistoric arts such as that found in Labrador Cave and in the Coa Valley. In the Mesolithic period, beginning in the 10th millennium BC, the Alarod Oscillation occurred. This was an interstadial deglaciation that lessened the harsh conditions of the Ice Age. The populations sheltered in Iberian Peninsula migrated and recolonized all of Western Europe. In this period one finds the Azilian culture in southern France and northern Iberia, as well as the Muga culture in the Tagus Valley. The Neolithic brought changes to the human landscape of Iberia, with the development of agriculture and the beginning of the European megalith culture. This spread to most of Europe and had one of its oldest and main centers in the territory of modern Portugal, as well as the Chalcolithic and Beaker cultures. During the first millennium BC, in the Bronze Age, the first wave of migrations into Iberia of speakers of Indo-European languages occurred. These were later followed by others that can be identified as Celts. Eventually urban cultures developed in southern Iberia, such as Tartessus, influenced by the Phoenician colonization of coastal Mediterranean Iberia, with strong competition from the Greek colonization. These two processes defined Iberia's cultural landscape, Mediterranean towards the southeast and a continental in the northwest. Languages. Latin was the official language of Hispania during the Rome's more than 600 years of rule, and by the empire's end in Hispania around 460 AD. All the original Iberian languages, except the ancestor of modern Basque, were extinct. Even after the fall of Rome and the invasion of the Germanic Visigoths and Suebi, Latin was spoken by nearly all of the population, but in its common form known as Vulgar Latin, and the regional changes which led to the modern Iberian Romance languages had already begun. Carthaginian Hispania. After its defeat by the Romans in the First Punic War, Carthage compensated for its loss of Sicily by rebuilding a commercial empire in Hispania. The major part of the Punic Wars, fought between the Punic Carthaginians and the Romans, was fought on the Iberian Peninsula. Carthage gave control of the Iberian Peninsula and much of its empire to Rome in 201 BC as part of the peace treaty after its defeat in the Second Punic War, and Rome completed its replacement of Carthage as the dominant power in the Mediterranean area. By then the Romans had adopted the Carthaginian name, Romanized first as Hispania. The term later received an H, much like what happened with Hibernia, and was pluralized as Hispania, as had been done with the three Gauls. Roman Hispania. Roman armies invaded Hispania in 218 BC and used it as a training ground for officers and as a proving ground for tactics during campaigns against the Carthaginians, the Iberians, the Lusitanians, the Gallaecians and other Celts. It was not until 19 BC that the Roman Emperor Augustus was able to complete the conquest. Until then, much of Hispania remained autonomous. Romanization proceeded quickly in some regions where we have references to the Toga T, and very slowly in others, after the time of Augustus. And Hispania was divided into three separately governed provinces. More importantly, Hispania was for 500 years part of a cosmopolitan world empire bound together by law, language, and the Roman road. But the impact of Hispania in the newcomers was also big. Caesar wrote on the civil wars that the soldiers from the Second Legion had become Hispanicized and regarded themselves as Hispanicus. Some of the peninsula's population were admitted into the Roman aristocratic class and they participated in governing Hispania and the Roman Empire, although there was a native aristocracy class who ruled each local tribe. The latifunda, large estates controlled by the aristocracy, were superimposed on the existing Iberian landholding system. The Romans improved existing cities, such as Lisbon and Tarragona, established Zaragoza, Merida, and Valencia, and reduced other native cities to mere villages. The peninsula's economy expanded under Roman tutelage. Hispania served as a granary and a major source of metals for the Roman market, and its harbors exported gold, tin, silver, lead, wool, wheat, olive oil, wine, fish, and garum. Agricultural production increased with the introduction of irrigation projects, some of which remain in use today. The Romanized Iberian populations and the Iberian-born descendants of Roman soldiers and colonists had all achieved the status of full Roman citizenship by the end of the 1st century. The emperors Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius were of Hispanic origin. Hispania was separated into 2 provinces, each ruled by a praetor, Hispania Citerior and Hispania Ulterior. The long wars of conquest lasted 2 centuries, and only by the time of Augustus did Rome manage to control Hispania Ulterior. Hispania was divided into 3 provinces in the 1st century BC. In the 4th century, Latinus Pacatus Trepanius, a Gallic rhetorician, dedicated part of his work to the depiction of the geography, climate and inhabitants of the peninsula, writing, "This Hispania produces tough soldiers, very skilled captains, prolific speakers, luminous bards. It is a mother of judges and princes. It has given Trajan, Hadrian, and Theodosius to the empire." With time, the name Hispania was used to describe the collective names of the Iberian Peninsula kingdoms of the Middle Ages, which came to designate all of the Iberian Peninsula plus the Balearic Islands. The Hispania during the first stages of Romanization, the peninsula was divided in 2 by the Romans for administrative purposes. The closest one to Rome was called Citerior and the more remote one Ulterior. The frontier between both was a sinuous line which ran from Carthago Nova to the Cantabrian Sea. Hispania Ulterior comprised what are now Andalusia, Portugal, Extremadura, Leon, a great portion of the former Castilla la Vieja, Galicia, Asturias, and the Basque Country. Hispania Citerior comprised the eastern part of former Castilla la Vieja, and what are now Aragon, Valencia, Catalonia, and a major part of former Castilla la Nueva. In the year BC 27, the general and politician Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa divided Hispania into 3 parts, namely dividing Hispania Ulterior into Baetica and Lusitania and attaching Cantabria and the Basque Country to Hispania Citerior. The Emperor Augustus in that same year returned to make a new division, leaving the provinces as follows: Provincia Hispania Ulterior Baetica, whose capital was Corduba, presently Córdoba. It included a little less territory than present-day Andalusia, since modern Almería, and a great portion of what today is Granada and Jaén were left outside, plus the southern zone of present-day Badajoz. The river Anas or Anas separated Hispania Baetica from Lusitania. Provincia Hispania Ulterior Lusitania, whose capital was Emerita Augusta and without Galaecia and Asturias. Provincia Hispania Citerior, whose capital was Tarraco. After gaining maximum importance, this province was simply known as Tarraconensis and it comprised Galaecia and Asturias. In AD 69, the province of Mauritania Tingitana was incorporated into the Diocesis Hispaniarum. By the 3rd century, the Emperor Caracalla made a new division which lasted only a short time. He split a Hispania Citerior again into 2 parts, creating the new provinces Provincia Hispania Nova Citerior and Asturica Lechiri. In the year 238, the unified province Tarraconensis or Hispania Citerior was re-established. In the 3rd century, under the soldier emperors, Hispania Nova was split off from Tarraconensis. As a small province but the home of the only permanent legion is Hispania, Legio Sevengemina. Beginning with Diocletian's Tetrarchy reform in AD 293. The new Diocesis Hispania became one of the 4 dioceses, governed by a vicarius, of the Praetorian Prefecture of Gaul. After the abolition of the imperial tetrarchs under the Western Emperor, the diocese, with capital at Emerita Augusta, comprised the 5 peninsular Iberian provinces. the Insulae Baleares and the North African province of Mauritania Tingitana. Christianity was introduced into Hispania in the 1st century and it became popular in the cities in the 2nd century. Little headway was made in the countryside, however, until the late 4th century, by which time Christianity was the official religion of the Roman Empire. Some heretical sects emerged in Hispania, most notably Priscillianism, but overall the local bishops remained subordinate to the Pope. Bishops who had official civil as well as ecclesiastical status in the late empire continued to exercise their authority to maintain order when civil governments broke down there in the 5th century. The Council of Bishops became an important instrument of stability during the ascendancy of the Visigoths. Rome continued to dominate the area until the collapse of the empire in the west. The Iberian population turned to the Visigoths, a Germanic people, for protection when Rome could no longer spare legions to guard the territory. Byzantine reconquest a century later, taking advantage of a struggle for the throne between the Visigothic kings Agila and Athanagild. The Eastern Emperor Justinian I sent an army under the command of Liberius to take back the peninsula from the Visigoths. This short-lived reconquest covered only a small strip of land along the Mediterranean coast, roughly corresponding to the ancient province of Boeotia, known as Spania, Germanic Hispania. Rome's loss of jurisdiction in Hispania began in 409, when the Germanic Bari, Suever and Vandals, together with the Sarmatian Alans, crossed the Rhine and ravaged Gaul until the Visigoths drove them into Iberia that same year. The Suever established a kingdom in Galaretia in what is today modern Galicia and northern Portugal. The Alans' allies, the Hasdingi Vandals, also established a kingdom in another part of Galaretia. The Alans established a kingdom in Lusitania, modern Alentejo and Algarve, in Portugal. The Salingi Vandals briefly occupied parts of South Iberia. Because large parts of Hispania were outside his control, the Western Roman Emperor, Honorius, commissioned his sister, Galla Placidia, and her husband Etholf, the Visigothic king, to restore order in the Iberian Peninsula. Honorius gave them the rights to settle in and to govern the area in return for defending it. The highly Romanized Visigoths entered Hispania in 415 and managed to compel the Vandals and Alans to sail for North Africa in 429. In 484 the Visigoths established Toledo as the capital of their monarchy. Successive Visigothic kings ruled Hispania as patricians who held imperial commissions to govern in the name of the Roman emperor. In 585 the Visigoths conquered the Suebic kingdom of Galicia, thus controlling almost all Hispania. Under the Visigoths, lay culture was not as highly developed as it had been under the Romans, and the task of maintaining formal education and government shifted decisively to the Church because its Roman clergy alone were qualified to manage higher administration. As elsewhere in early medieval Europe, the Church in Hispania stood as society's most cohesive institution. The Visigoths are also responsible for the introduction of mainstream Christianity to the Iberian Peninsula. The earliest representation of Christ in Spanish religious art can be found in a Visigothic hermitage, Santa Maria de Lara. It also embodied the continuity of Roman order. In addition, Romans continued to run the civil administration and Latin continued to be the language of government and of commerce. Religion was the most persistent source of friction between the Roman Catholic Romans and their Arian Visigothic overlords, whom the former considered heretical. At times this tension invited open rebellion, and restive factions within the Visigothic aristocracy exploited it to weaken the monarchy. In 589, Ricard, a Visigothic ruler, renounced his Arianism before the Council of Bishops at Toledo and accepted Catholicism, thus assuring an alliance between the Visigothic monarchy and the Romans. This alliance would not mark the last time in the history of the peninsula that political unity would be sought through religious unity. court ceremonials, from Constantinople, that proclaimed the imperial sovereignty and unity of the Visigothic state were introduced at Toledo. Still, civil war, royal assassinations, and usurpation were commonplace, and warlords and great landholders assumed wide discretionary powers. Bloody family feuds went unchecked. The Visigoths had acquired and cultivated the apparatus of the Roman state, but not the ability to make it operate to their advantage. In the absence of a well-defined hereditary system of succession to the throne, rival factions encouraged foreign intervention by the Greeks, the Franks, and finally the Muslims in internal disputes and in royal elections. According to Isidore of Seville, it is with the Visigothic domination of the zone that the idea of a peninsular unity is sought after, and the phrase Mother Hispania is first spoken. Up to that date, Hispania designated all of the peninsula's lands. In Historia Gothorum, the Visigoth Suinilla appears as the first monarch where Hispania is dealt with as a Gothic nation.